with these dreams, you can't predict them. You can't have that all the time, and which makes them really unique and special. That's why some people only have one their entire lives. Other people have, hundreds.
Dreams. What do they mean, and how can they help in the grieving process? In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, I am joined by Joshua Black, a grief researcher, speaker, consultant, and host of the Grief Dreams podcast. Joshua's work focuses on dreams and continuing bonds after loss, including prenatal and pet loss.
I am very excited to get right into the subject of dreams and the dreams those of us who have lost a loved one have or don't have, as the case may be, with Joshua Black, who has a PhD and specializes in grief dreams. And Joshua, first of all, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I always love the opportunity to raise awareness on a topic most people don't know much about.
It's really interesting. I belong to several different groups that include bereaved mothers, and especially mothers who have lost children to overdose, which is, a stigmatized death. And obviously there's a lot involved there. And all of us talk about dreams, and dreaming is such an important thing to, I think, every mom. Maybe it's a way to feel like we're still in touch with our child. Why do you think that is? That dreams are so fascinating and important to those of us who've lost a loved one?
Well, I think there's two things we're talking about here. One's just dreams in general, and the other one's dreams to have the deceased present. And I think that's what you're talking about, is when the deceased is present in some way in the dream. And they mean something because they affect us emotionally on so many levels. And we remember them as different than other dreams that we have for the most part. They stay with us. Where like most dreams, you'll wake up and then like by the time you go to use the washroom, it's gone. And you can't, even if it was a great dream, you still can't remember it. But whatever with these dreams, they sit in a different part of us where negative or positive, we're reflecting and remembering those. And it could be because we got a chance to sort of see them again in the imagery, which is always powerful. Sometimes we get to hear them. But when it comes to those comforting dreams, it can be very powerful in people's journey through grief, especially if you're spiritual. Some people will sort of see it as like a visitation of some sort, and it can give them comfort that they've crossed over, or that they're there, that they're watching out for them, stuff like that, where other people who aren't spiritual are still finding benefit in these dreams, but just what they get out of it is a little different. And so I think it changes us and it helps us through our grief or hinders us through our grief. And I think that's why it's such an important topic.
Marjorie Moore's daughter Angel came to her in an uncanny dream to let her know an important message in her drug overdose case was coming in.
Angel's comes to me, is like, Mom. I'm like, what, Angel? I'm trying to take a nap. Leave me alone. It was like she was right there. She goes, check your phone. I'm like, Angel, I'm not worried about my phone. Just let me take a nap. I am tired. I'm exhausted. Mom, check your phone. I said, okay. So, of course, I woke up. I checked my phone. It was from the detective of her case. It just made me feel like she was right there, like she was alive.
I'm glad people are sharing though, because you don't hear that a lot. A lot of people keep them hidden. And so it's got to be something that's stating about you and the group that people are opening up and sharing these experiences.
Well, I think it's so important to these mothers. It feels like you're reconnecting with your lost child. And many times they can be comforting. They can be really comforting.
It's super comforting. like so comforting that you couldn't even imagine or predict it. And I think that's what's really interesting about sort of this topic is that, I'm going to share a little bit about dreams research in general, so people can understand how unique these dreams actually are. So when we look at just dreams in general, what we find is that on average, people have negative dreams. And that's because, dreams reflect our waking life. So if we're stressed or depressed or anxious, we're going to have more negative dreams. If we're watching the news or some kind of negative show, it's going to also creep into our imagery of the dream. And so what they found after trauma, your dreams are even more consistently negative. And so you'd think after grief, you would have more negative images and in general, but also with the deceased, because you are grieving in many ways. So you should have more negative dreams. But what the research is showing that I've done is that people are, if they have a dream, it's going to be more commonly going to be positive and comforting than anything. So just in a couple studies, so after spousal loss, what was interesting is 86% of people reported having at least one dream of the deceased partner within the first year or two. And of that, 90%, it was a positive experience, a positive dream, and 40% had a negative dream. But what was interesting is that the people who had a negative dream also had a positive dream. And so the theory there goes that people are probably having more negative dreams in the beginning, and then as they work through some of the loss, it can turn to something more positive. And all of that was replicated after pet loss too, and you see the same thing after really any type of loss. So even miscarriages, and kids will have similar themes and dreams, but they do tend to be more positive. I think that is the uniqueness of these dreams, because they tend to be very comforting, and there's different reasons why that is beneficial for us in the grief process that we can talk about if you want.
Yes. I do want to talk about that, because I think, like you said, you're in this horrible negative state of trauma. So you have a positive dream, or one that makes you feel comforted. Is that a way to maybe help you heal?
Yeah, it does there's so much we don't know of what it does, but we do know some things just based on some of the research and just by talking to people about the impacts it has on them. And one of the things that helps us regulate our emotions, which is very beneficial in the grieving process. We can get stuck in this overwhelming sadness and grief, and that changes our outlook on life, how we problem solve, how we get to bed, how we sleep. So when you have one of these very beautiful dreams, it can allow you that respite in a way. So when you wake up, you're processing things a little bit differently, which is beautiful. The other thing that it can do is it can provide us with a lot of grief work. And so that could be maintaining a continuing bond, which has been shown in my research and other research, that can have a really important impact on the grief journey by maintaining bonds and remembering them in many different ways. And what's really sad about many of the losses, especially if you see them, dead or dying, that's their last memory. And now, because of this dream, our last memory can be very positive, and that's beautiful. But I've seen so many things when it comes to these dreams, when it comes to giving advice on circumstances, providing forgiveness, if it was even a suicide, or providing understanding. So there's a lot of things that, a lot of questions we have as we go through loss that some of these dreams help answer for people. And the last thing I want to say is that there is this huge theme of love that is present in these images. And for me, that is really unique, because what people say, it's just a loving feeling. It's a different kind of love. It's very peaceful in many of the transformative dreams anyways. And I think there's something to that. And it's something like in waking life, I don't think we ever get a chance to really get to, because there's so much anxiety in waking life and so much stuff under the surface. But in these moments, there is this peace. And I can only imagine what the mind and the body can do in a space like that, how it can heal, how it can problem solve. Because that was the big thing with me. I didn't start on this journey because, I saw some research or whatever. I had my own experience where I was in deep grief and I wasn't going anywhere. And I had this dream that completely changed me. And I was able to say goodbye to my father and tell him that I loved him. And the scenery was just so beautiful that when I woke up, everything was different. And it wasn't because I interpreted it. The dream itself changed me. And I think that's why I try to get people to understand is, when it comes to the dream is doing something, and then your interpretation is doing something else. And that can be positive or negative based on your cultural and how you sort of view it. And you just have to really use discernment on your interpretation. But the dream itself is doing something.
Yes, and I'm so sorry about the loss of your father. It's really what drove you into this field, right?
For the most part, yeah. When I had my dream, I knew it was something special. And I remember just sitting at the edge of my bed thinking, what was that? I had no concept of what happened because I felt completely different. And I was able to regulate my emotions. Prior to that, it was 3 months of just pure, I just to say depression. I was just in this gray world. But the moment I woke up, I knew something changed within me. But it wasn't until I started volunteering at a hospice a couple of years later, looking for some type of meaning from my life. It's in a weird position. Anyways, I was looking for some type of meaning, and I thought, like maybe I'll volunteer and find meaning that way. And when I volunteered with the bereaved, they had a lot of questions on the topic, and when I looked at the research, there wasn't anything there I could give them. And so that's when I had a moment on, could I be a researcher? Could I actually do this? Like, I wasn't planning on that. It's going to be a huge learning curve. And I decided to take the risk and have the courage to sort of say, let's try and see how far I can get. And, I went all the way through. So that's really encouraging.
So you had this dream about your dad and being able to say goodbye to him before you were the researcher. And then what did you learn, or how would you interpret that dream now after all the research that you've done?
It's just a beautiful phenomenon that I would say saved me. And it really taught me too, that the dream itself has its own power, I guess. And it's beyond interpretation. A lot of people want to jump to an interpretation like, oh, that's a visit or that's whatever. Like, when I woke up, I didn't have one thought of what it was. I was just thinking about, how did that even happen? Like, how could that even happen? For me to sort of be so depressed and then all of a sudden to be like so okay. Like, I was still regulating my emotions. Like, I was still sad my dad died, but something physically changed within me. And when I look at that, and I've looked at all the research, I can understand, what it was doing in many ways. So my dad died very suddenly. And so be able to say goodbye would have been a block, I feel, in my grief. And so to be able to express that, be able to say goodbye to him, I think was an important part of that dream. The other one was that I loved him. And that's something that I never said to my dad for a long time. Even though, like, we were talking and stuff, we were just two males in a society where we didn't share feelings to each other. And so for me, I didn't realize how much I really wanted to say that. Like, no one could have told me that. It was just something that I look back, I'm like, wow, it's something I do more often now, because there was, in case something does happen. But I think it's very important to share how we feel to others, just to remind them that they are important in our lives. And, words are a beautiful thing to be able to do that. And you see that with a lot of other dreams too, where the dreamer is expressing their love to the deceased in many ways. And I think there's something cathartic about that. And the other thing was just the power of love. Like, that scene of love, I think, is, as much as those other things helped, I think the scene of and the feelings of love can do monumental things. And I'm still trying to reach those states in waking life, but at least I have like a lighthouse or a guide that what's possible. Because I always say, if it's possible in a dream, like the feeling, why can't it be possible in waking life? And I see that amongst so many people. I just had an individual that's come on my podcast that really talked about, in the pandemic, she had a loss of her grandmother. And in the dream, she was basically having this party, and she realized her grandmother wasn't there. And so she started crying on her mother's shoulder. And then all of a sudden, she saw her grandmother standing in the doorway. And her grandmother was emitting this type of love, as she said, she's never felt before, but it was overwhelming. And she said it was so comforting to her in the dream. But when she woke up, she said it's one of those things that really helped her in her grief journey. And she continues to look at that dream as she moves forward in life in other circumstances, because she can still remember what the feeling of love felt like. And so, yeah, it is amazing. On how my dream actually like parallels a lot of stuff. And I kind of like that I had the experience. If I didn't have the experience, I probably wouldn't be studying this. If I was, I probably wouldn't care as much maybe. But because I had a life-changing experience, I think it really helps me, understand, what the people are either desiring for those people who haven't had one, or to understand maybe had the power of some of these dreams in people's lives.
The last time, I saw my daughter was when she had died, and it was very traumatic, very traumatic. And we mothers who lose children to overdose really lose our kids before we lose them. And the first dream I can remember having about her was just 1 or 2 months after she died. She was in the dream, and I was with my other children. We were walking in this area, and Emily was about 10, and she was acting goofy and making faces and dancing. She was joyful. She was always a joyful kid. She wasn't as joyful of an adult because of the addiction. And I don't know if I got comfort from that dream, but I always wondered what it meant. Why was she 10 years old in my dream, and why was she dancing? And so I'm really joyful.
Why wouldn't you want to dance in a dream? And so it's just, and so like those images of like, what does joyful mean to that person? And I think is, what maybe mothers would reflect on, especially if like the teenager is having so many issues. It's like those are the moments that really captivate sort of those moments of being free and being at peace. And when I look at children, they are the freest in the world, more than like an adult, just because they don't know anything about money and they're just doing their own thing. And I think that's a beautiful quality. And I have seen that where teenagers will, or even like some young adults, or sometimes for a mother, will be as a child in many ways, and even sometimes even younger than that. And I think that's just a part of being a mom. Like you have so much experience. Like for my dad, I don't think he's ever going to be a child because I've never seen him that way. I've never experienced him that way. And so when I have dreams of my dad, it's more around the age where he died. I was around 50. That's how I sort of see him. But I think it's different for parents, because you see this whole trajectory of individual's life. And so it may be just captivating some of those very beautiful moments and within your mind or your soul. And then how you interpret that, it's up to you, right? Like if you're spiritual, you might say, oh, it was her coming back as a child to play with me and to remind me to be playful, and like all that sort of stuff. Or it could just be, if you're not spiritual, it could be just a beautiful moment where you can just remember the time she did have, and that her life was meaningful and you had some really good times together, and to sort of feel that comfort and to feel that joy. So like it's something to hang on to, because you said like it's a tough process to deal with any kind of loss, but also sort of the overdose. It's so traumatic, and these moments can maybe help shift us in our memory of events and just allow us to process different emotions that maybe we have a hard time. As I sort of said, like I was stuck, and I know a lot of people get stuck after any kind of traumatic loss, in the events and the events itself and the negative trauma emotions of it all. And they just can't feel that joy that they normally could. And these dreams may help with that. And I think there's a lot more research to know how these dreams benefit us in the long run. But if it's comforting to you and it's a comforting image, I say, like that's a beautiful moment to have. And, how you interpret that, that's up to you.
Now, I've only had, a handful of dreams, probably 3 that I can remember. I wonder why I don't remember more, if I'm dreaming more, if I just don't remember it. A lot of us don't remember our dreams at all. I would say mine are sort of sporadic. Like sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't. So can we do something to make sure we remember our dreams if we want to remember them?
Yeah, there's different ways. So one of the things I really wanted to find out was there a scientific explanation to help people understand maybe why they're not remembering as many dreams as they want to? Because I heard some really horrifying, I guess, reasons why people thought that they haven't had a dream. And that's really discouraging for me, because you never put a positive reason on why you don't remember a dream. It's a lot of times for people it's negative. So they'll say, if they're spiritual, maybe they didn't cross over, maybe they're mad at me, maybe they're just holding their visit back. There's a lot of sort of things that they sort of will go to, and none of it's actually positive. So it just complicates their grief. And so I wanted to look, and I looked at a lot of different, factors when it came to these dreams in general, grief, different types of personality, age, gender, even spirituality. And what we found in multiple studies, so the data was replicated, which is always beautiful for research, that dream recall in general is the most important factor for remembering these types of dreams. And so what it's saying is, people who remember more dreams on average are going to remember more of these types of dreams on average. But what's also saying underneath it all is that people are probably dreaming about the deceased more than they're actually remembering it. And that is an interesting question just in general on, why we remember certain dreams at certain times in our grief journey. And that is its own mystery. And because we can't see what we're dreaming about, it's one of those things that we may never have an answer for until we can. I know there is research trying to find a way to understand or to have like insight into what we're dreaming about. But it probably won't be for another 15 years or so. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of mystery there. And I think, when we look at that, when I talk to the bereaved now and they ask that question, I always want to ask them, how often do you remember dreaming in general? And a lot of times what they say is not very often. And then I just put the 2 dots together saying, well, if you're not remembering a lot of your dreams, how are you going to remember these types of dreams? And then they say, oh, and then you can see this relief on the, like this, just like slide down. And I also state 10% of the population doesn't remember dreams. So they're dreaming. That's not at all. So if you talk about this dream I had, they don't know what you're talking about. It's just they've never experienced. They never remembered one, anyways.
It's not that they're everybody dreams, right? So it's not that they're not dreaming. Yeah.
For what we know, everyone is dreaming, and we're dreaming in non-REM and REM. So a lot of the time, our mind is processing and seeing things in many ways. And so that's still a mystery and sort of that sleep area. But there is some things that we can do. So just because you don't remember a lot of dreams doesn't mean that it's hopeless. So there's different things we can do. So research has shown you can increase your dream recall rate. And that's the easiest part of that is just you have to value dreams. And there's different ways to value dreams. It's listening to this episode, talking about your dreams with other people, keeping a dream diary. So all that is saying is you're telling your mind, I want to remember these now, because our culture is so bad at talking about the importance of dreams. My first course that anyone ever told me about dreams was in third year university in a sleep course, which only certain universities even have. So most people go through their entire life without actually having any kind of academic information on dreams. And even in the sleep course, it was only 1 hour segment on dreams. And there's so much research now.
Kalinda Glad's dreams of her deceased daughter Erica have only made her more upset.
We have a pet Maltese, and my daughter was very attached to him, and she was never really like a pet type of person, but she really got attached to our dog. His name was Tijak, and so she really they had a really good bond. And in the dream, it was just it was normal. It wasn't like I felt in the dream that she was dead. That I knew that she was deceased. That it was just normal. She was out sitting with some friends and just having her just being her normal self. And I told her, hey, watch T-Shock for a little while. I'm going to go take a walk and just watch him because he has a tendency to run off. And and she's like, okay, Ma, I got it. And so I went for the walk and I came back and she was like, Ma, you were right. She said he ran off and I can't find him. And I just went, just started crying and crying and crying. And then finally that's when my husband woke me up and I ran and got T-Jock, and I just started holding him. He was, licking my tears away. I could tell that he was, he knew I was upset and he was comforting me. That was the one dream that really stood out. And
if you're grieving, you're probably going to remember a lot more negative dreams too. So that's just a little caveat there. But we shouldn't be afraid of negative dreams. There's a lot of information that we can learn about ourselves through negative dreams, and there's different ways we can work with negative dreams once we're awake.
Yeah, let's talk about the negative dreams. And I've talked to mothers who wake up more upset. They're crying. It's not comforting. How should they look at that? I think it's tormenting, actually.
Yeah, it definitely can be. And there's a couple reasons for that. So one of the things is the emotion regulation. So positive dreams not only help, but also negative dreams can help if you're avoiding your loss. And so that's one of the things to understand, because one of the tendencies we do as humans is to avoid our feelings of grief and to try to get back to how things used to be in many ways. So that can actually bring up that, especially if you have an avoidant attachment style. I can see that being beneficial in the sense of trying to get you to actually face some of your grief. But if you're already facing your grief, so what's going on? And so when you look at these distressing negative dreams, what you find in the research that I've done anyways, is that they're related to, trauma symptoms and unresolved feelings of guilt or blame. And so there's a lot of stuff you can learn from that and to understand what are you trying to go through. So for a trauma dream, you may relive the events of that day of hearing about the news. You could even manifest maybe how they even died kind of thing, in an exaggerated fashion, you're trying to put the pieces together. In many ways, or you could have even these dreams of feeling helpless to helping the individual, right? So these are common trauma themes that you have. And the theory goes that when the the dreams itself are trying to process those emotions for you. So it's not like they're just happening. There is some active processing going on that is trying to help you solidify some of these memories and process the horror of everything that you're going through. But these dreams can help you if you're working with someone and as a therapist or something. By bringing these dreams in, these dreams can pinpoint maybe what you should be working on, because there's a lot of clues within there on maybe what you should be focusing on in the session.
What about the kinds of dreams and I've had something that was maybe similar to this, like the kind of dream where they're not dead, or like in the case of the dream I had, my daughter was angry with me for telling people that she was dead. Why are you telling people I'm dead? I'm not dead, And so that's probably a pretty common dream, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if they get angry at you, but yeah, that theme itself is actually very common. It seems to be very common soon after loss, as we're just digesting the fact that the person has died and your mind's still trying to work through it. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing where there's like this rebuttal. That's why the deceased will either come in saying I was never dead at all, or they say I was dead, I didn't like it very much. They're trying to give an explanation on why they're there. And if you think of it as like your mind is trying to figure out what's going on, it just needs some type of explanation. You can sort of like see that parallel. But what's interesting is usually after that fact, as the dreams go on, what happens is there's usually this message or something else that comes after it. So it's I wasn't really dead, but I just wanted to let you know that I love you, kind of thing, right? And so for your dream, which is very interesting in the sense that, there's this argument going on, which is probably in its own way kind of comforting, because that is probably something you used to do with your daughter in many ways that you kind of miss, right? And so it's a part of that continuing bond to remember those moments that, do make us chuckle in many ways. And you can see the dream however you want. But at the end of the day, it's that theme is very common for a lot of people after many types of loss.
Mother Alicia Steinfurth shared a dream she had about her son Josh, who died in 2020.
I was dreaming that Josh came home. I said, "What are you doing here? You died." "No, Mom, I didn't die. I faked my own death." And I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have to, all these people sent us sympathy cards. I was happy, but I'm like, what's going to happen? You're going to go to prison now because you faked your own death and all this stuff. And then I woke up. Then as I was driving to work, a song came on. It was Tim McGraw and Faith Hill. And just as I said stars, I see the biggest, brightest shooting star go across the sky. And I just thought, oh, there's my Josh watching out for me.
And after a while, do those kind of dreams go away as you maybe accept the death more, accept reality more?
Yeah, that's what I've seen. And it becomes more one-on-one. You're either hanging out, the death, like them just being there doesn't really matter anymore. Like, even though you may know they're dead, it's not a question that you're even asking anymore. It's like you're over that piece in that way. And now it's about, talking, bonding, getting a message or just getting support in a different way. And that's what I sort of love about how these dreams do change over time. And so in the beginning, even a lot of dreams will deal with your grief in a lot of ways and provide you comfort and support. But as you move forward, as you work through your loss, what's beautiful is that these dreams don't actually go away. They may decrease in frequency per month, but they'll pop up in other times in your life usually of stress outside of the grief aspect. So let's say you got a divorce, or let's say you're in a pandemic, which we all are. What happens is these dreams come back, and they come back in a different way. So they're not comforting you over the loss anymore. They're comforting you over your current circumstances and providing you advice. And, I think that is beautiful. So in the pandemic, I've seen a ton of dreams of people just hanging out because they said they were feeling isolated, and these dreams help them to feel less isolated, just hanging out with the deceased. Other times the deceased is asking how they're doing, which is really amazing. Other times it's the individual will pose a question. And I remember the one was this guy, basically the dreamer, was asking, are we all going to be okay? Talking about, the world and the pandemic and everything. And then the deceased says, well, how are you doing? And the dreamer said, well, I'm doing okay. And the deceased says, well, I think then we're all going to be okay. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, because it starts with ourselves, right? Like, we start looking at everyone else, we're missing the whole point of what we can be in the world and how we can support those around us. Because if it doesn't start with us, then yeah, it's a loss. Like, I don't know if we're going to be okay, but if you're okay, well, then that's a starting block for the rest of the world. And so it's very wise in how, like, it was questioned, like the questioning for the individual. And everyone's so unique. Everyone will need certain things to problem solve and feel inspired, to feel hopeful. And then at end of life, what's interesting is these dreams will then change to help individuals as they die, to reassure them that if they're spiritual, they're going to be there for them, or just help them let go in many ways to allow them to just transition from life to death. And I think that's the beautiful aspect and how unique these dreams are, because you don't really see that in any kind of dream stuff that I've seen anyways, and how these things change and how important they are throughout people's lives.
You mentioned volunteering in hospice. You're talking about people transitioning, to the next phase. Dreaming is important during that phase. Do people remember their dreams more, or are they talking about them more at that stage in the end of life?
Well, they are, and they sometimes have visions too. And it's kind of hard to know if they're sleeping or not, just because like at end of life, their sleep stages are really off, and because you're lying down, you may be sleeping and not know it. There's a lot of different things it's hard to know. But yeah, like the research has shown, they are having a lot of these experiences. And anytime you sleep, so the more you sleep and the more often you wake up, the more chance you're going to have of having a dream. So with them, there's a lot of sleeping going on, a lot of fragmented sleep going on. And so when your sleep is fragmented, there's more chance. So they're probably dreaming a little bit more than someone at not at end of life, to tell you the truth. But yeah, it's going on there too, and which is encouraging, because when we look at even in the pandemic, a lot of these people are isolated, alone, but they may be having a lot of these experiences to comfort them and to feel less isolated as they work through their grief that they couldn't have, like the dying process, that they couldn't have done without that. So there is still, I think, something going on that's really trying to help us in many ways. When the external circumstances change, these I don't think change at all in the sense of what they're trying to do.
I know it's always been kind of a thing to analyze dreams. Look up your dream. If you dreamt about a bird, or for decades, people have been talking about those types of things. So what about symbolism in dreams, colors, animals, different things like that? Do you read a lot into the symbolism of things?
So that's actually a really good question, because a lot of people, when they are interested in dreams or figure that maybe there's something to this dream, they'll go online or they go buy a dream dictionary, and it's such a bad thing to do. But we said, we don't get trained in dream research, we don't get trained in dreams, so we just go to what's available. And then we start believing whatever we read, and it's not the best thing. People need to understand we all have our own dream language. So you dreaming of an elephant would be it's going to be different than me dreaming of an elephant, just based on our experiences with elephants and what we've seen and heard throughout the day, and what we kind of stuffed animals we liked as we grew up. And so there's a lot of unique details that only the individual can know, and that just takes time to learn about your own dream language. So someone online is only going to tell you what their language is, and it can be completely different from yours. And there are cultures that have certain symbols mean certain things, and if you're in that culture, that may be a possibility of what that dream is representing. But for the most part, it's not. We don't ever usually just dream of one object, like an elephant, just quote unquote. Usually we're on an elephant, flying in the air, eating some apples, visiting, some other place. So there's this story that goes along. And there's a lot of information in the story, and it's not just like the elephant. There's so much else. And so the more you pay attention to your dreams and you start working through them, the more you'll start understanding your own dream language. And the best way, as I always say for people, is it's trying to get you to understand waking life in some way. And so what I always do is start with the emotions of that dream that you have, and then try to pinpoint on what it's talking about in your waking life. And then from there, you can connect the images. And that's probably the easiest way to start. And as you get, as you do it more, you'll get better. And as you do it, your mind will start putting it in a way for you to understand, and which I really like. And it took me, I grew up in a household where my mom and dad both believed nightmares anyways were from the devil. And so I had a lot of nightmares as a kid. And so I never believed they were anything. If anything, it was a haunting in a way. But as I moved forward, it wasn't until I almost got into university that I started valuing dreams in a new way, and I started understanding my own dream language. It just takes time, like anything else. It's a skill, and so it's one of the things you have to keep up. And there are some dream books out there that can help you build the skill, but I wouldn't go to a dream dictionary at all.
Okay. What about the longing to dream about the loved one who you lost? I've talked to, parents who just, they want their children to come to them in a dream and they don't, at least they don't remember it. It's not
Right,
happening. I
yeah.
mean, I think it's that longing for some sort of peace in such an unsettling time.
Yeah, it's different on like sort of have they already had one, if it's just going to be their first one. Like there's a lot of factors involved in why someone wants a dream. And that's just a discussion to have, an open discussion to reduce any kind of fears or issues that they may be carrying. But yeah, who wouldn't want one? Like I guess like some cultures probably would say they don't want one. But for me, it's like if you can have a comforting moment with your loved one, like and have a hug or to be reassured that you're still loved, like why not? Like life is so difficult, and one of the issues with a lot of people dying is that they're part of how we see ourselves. They give us love in many ways. They reinforce that we're loved, and it's such a hard process to love ourselves. It's like this world is so tough on us in many ways, but these dreams, but like when someone dies, we're left with less support than we had before to try to make it through this crazy life. And so what I like about these dreams, especially with the love, is that it really helps people. And why wouldn't you want more support as you move forward? But, with these dreams, you can't predict them. You can't,
Right.
You can't have that all the time, and which makes them really unique and special. That's why some people only have one their entire lives. Other people have, hundreds. And it's just really, I'm not unsure to like exactly why that is for some and others, still more research, but there is something we can do. So there's a thing called dream incubation that has been throughout history, where you think of a dream and you can like either a problem or something, and your mind will dream about a solution in some way. So what I did was I built a dream builder worksheet. And what you can do here is, write down the dream you want to have. So yes, you're not getting a dream yet, but what dream would you want to have tonight if you could? So let's think about that. And so you use the exercise to write it down. And it can take 10 to 15 minutes, and a lot of emotion can be expressed through it, which I really love, because it's connecting to something deep within us. And it's another tool that we can use to talk about our grief and talk about what we're longing for. And then, there may be a possibility that actually helps you. But, I think one of the major things is a lot of times we want a dream, but we don't actually articulate it or think about what type of dream we want. What is the scene going to be? What do they want to be wearing? Like there's a lot of factors. A lot of people just want a comforting dream, but no, let's name it. Let's talk about it some more. And it allows us to talk about the subject a little bit more too. And you can see a lot of, rich detail on a person's life. Like on my podcast, it's one of the things at the end I always ask is, what dream would you want to have tonight if you could? And I learned so much about the guests. I talked to the guests for like 45 minutes, and all of a sudden they say this dream, and it like opens up all these other conversations on like why they're wearing that, and like also and like where they are. And I'm like, wow, I'm like, that is so amazing how we can just spur new conversation. I think that's really what we can really hope for, is that someone's there to just listen about our longings, what we wish to have. And if we concoct one, hopefully we can get one. I know some people, it has triggered something similar, not the exact same one, but hey, it's a shot, right? And it's just, doing something proactively to try to do it.
It's kind of just thinking about it as being specific and then asking for it, basically, and waiting for it to happen. Huh. Oh, I never thought of dreams in that way, that you could actually think of something and maybe you dream about it.
Well, yeah. Well, what's interesting about dreams is, especially the last half of the night, or as you're going to bed, a lot of those things that you watch or you read will creep into your imagery in some way. And you probably have noticed that in many ways. And so it's really what you're thinking about before bed is what's being digested, what kind of dreams you remember. And it's just another way. And throughout history, people have used dream incubation in many ways to, like I said, problem solve or to name their child. There's a lot of different things that they use these dreams for. So it is an approach, and you just try it out, and it can be just a nice relaxing activity also, because it can calm you down a little bit. As long as you're not anxious saying, I need this, just think about that, like almost like a meditative practice. Be in the dream, like just, hold that dream, and then go to bed. And as you fall asleep, maybe you'll actually experience something similar to that. But if anything, you're going to be going to bed, hopefully a little more calmer, which will produce more positive dreams.
Right. Depending if you're watching some sort of a dark show, Netflix or something before you go to bed, probably not the best thing to do, right? A lot of people do it, but probably not the best thing to do.
No, and then they complain they have nightmares. You're like, well, I think you enjoy nightmares because you watch them all the time on TV. Like, it's just like
Kind of what goes in, right? Your brain has to process it. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today on the podcast, and I'm going to direct people to your website, to that worksheet that you talked about. You also have your own podcast on dreams, and we'll include all the information on how people can find that on the show notes. What's next for you with your dream work? You said we're about 10 or 15 years away from maybe seeing our dreams. Like, could we bring them, could we somehow have a computer interpret them and bring them to life? I mean, what's next in this field, do you think?
Well, just in this field itself, I think raising awareness is the biggest part, because it's just understanding no one's trained in this area, no one in thanatology, there's no courses on this. And a lot of people still don't value the importance of these types of dreams. And then when you talk to people, they don't care about other dreams, but they care about these dreams. And I think it's very important to start here for us to raise awareness on the topic and understand that it's so common in the grieving process, but yet we know very little. So hopefully these conversations will normalize the experience for people. I've heard horror stories on how people approach the topic. Doctors, pastors, all sorts of people, they have their own ideas, and none of it's based on the research. And so hopefully this can normalize it, allow people to have a safe space to start sharing these experiences and get some insights into them. And that's sort of why I created the website. There's common questions, there's information on there for people to gain some information about, what they can do as they move forward, to not be afraid of these dreams, but just to work with them. And through that, hopefully more research and funding gets thrown at the area so we can do more of this, because I think it's such an important topic to help understand people, but also understand the grief journey, because there are, warning flags. There is one theme called "Come Join Me" that seems to be should be a red flag for anyone working with the bereaved, because it seems to be related to high trauma. And a clinician said that in her practice that they're related to high suicide ideation. And that's where the deceased is trying to convince you to kill yourself or to drag you into the afterlife. And so we have to use discernment when we look at these dreams. I know a lot of people get excited, especially if they had a positive one or they feel that they're a visitation. But we got to use discernment in how we talk about it and how we hold space, because you don't know what the other person is dreaming about, and we don't know, what their beliefs are. So those are the things, I guess, hopefully in the future and in 5-10 years, we'll see where that is. But right now it's just raising awareness that this is a thing we need to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, that is really concerning. I guess I had a mother who followed her son overdosed and died about the same time as my daughter. And not quite 3 years later, she completed suicide and followed him. I don't know what her dreams were. She didn't share anything like that with me, but that certainly would be a warning sign, right? That something like that could happen.
It would be, and it's actually disheartening because we don't provide an open space for people to even share, to even ask a question. As I said, most people don't share. So you really have to be, if you're the one, dealing with the individual, you have to ask what they're dreaming about. And people tend to be more honest than not, but I can see a lot of people having, even though those dreams are rare, more rare than anything, of them trying to convince them to kill themselves, I can see them being effective in people killing themselves. And so we need to sort of talk about this, and we can save lives in a lot of different ways.
All right. Well, we'll keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And as I said, we'll put links to your website if people want to learn more. Really appreciate the conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the space to be able to share, and I appreciate what you're doing to just raise awareness on grief in itself.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this latest edition of Grieving Out Loud. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider giving a positive review. Wishing you faith, hope, and courage.